And today's selection is another one of the 5 loves that Greg is writing about. He says, the meaning of Valentine's Day is not limited to a single day. What it calls to mind is applicable every day of the year. Do you know where the tradition of giving and receiving Valentines comes from? It can be traced back to this Catholic priest who was martyred in the 3rd century and later granted sainthood. According to legend, St. Valentine secretly performed marriage ceremonies for young lovers when the emperor outlawed weddings. When the priest was imprisoned, he received letters and tokens of love from young people throughout the Roman Empire. Hand-scribbled notes were slid under the door of his cell. Curiously, the original Valentines were not romantic love notes at all. They were expressions of friendship. They were a tangible way of letting a lonely pastor know that he was being thought about. They were a way of offering encouragement. Now, it's important also, I think, to note here that there are variations on the theme of St. Valentine, but this is certainly one of the historic applications of why we have Valentine's Day. Now, yesterday we considered Jesus' words, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." While our spouses are the most important neighbors in our lives, those who live near us are important as well. In the 10th chapter of Luke, we learn more. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "Well, what's written in the law?" Jesus replied. "How do you read it?" The man answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus replied, "You've answered correctly. Do this and you will live." But the man wanted to justify himself, and so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" As Jesus proceeds to tell his familiar parable of the Good Samaritan for the first time, he clarifies just who those are that we are called to love. It might very well be those who live next door. They're our neighbors, but so are those who are in need, who live near us wherever we are. People at work, at church, in school, in the neighborhood, so to speak. When we moved our family halfway across the country, Greg writes, 18 years ago, my wife and I determined we would get to know those living around us. It didn't take long. One of the first persons who introduced herself to us was a woman who lived across the street. She had not been looted and left for dead like the victim in Jesus' parable, but she had been robbed of her peace of mind and needed a good neighbor. Her husband had died the month before we arrived. Within a few months' time, her teenage daughter surprised her with news that she was pregnant. In this case, loving our neighbor meant shoveling snow from a widow's driveway, leaving cookies at her door, spending hours listening to her breaking heart, celebrating her granddaughter's arrival when the baby was eventually born, with gifts. Loving our neighbors need not be some intimidating concept. It can be as easy as getting to know our neighbors and discovering their interests, heartaches, dreams, and then responding in tangible ways. Could be a greeting card, a bouquet of flowers, or a plant, maybe a gift card to a coffee shop. The lines from a contemporary hymn say it well. I want to reach my world through acts of kindness, a listening ear, a hand that reaches out, making the time to get to know my neighbor, discovering their passions, fears, and doubts, extending mercy when their hearts are broken, transparently acknowledging our pain. Yes, being vulnerable and admitting when we are hurting is a way of loving a neighbor and drawing close to them.